I'm Nell Pattison. This is my novel, The Silent House.
And I'm Rebecca, and I got to put it into audio.
Silent House is a crime thriller. It focuses on the death of a child in the deaf community and follows Paige Northwood, the British Sign Language interpreter, who the police call in to support them with the investigation.
Your book's quite unusual, isn't it? Because you've got not just only Paige's perspective of her interactions with the investigation, but you've also got other perspectives throughout the book as well.
Yes, there are flashbacks that you see from other characters' perspectives as you go through.
And most of those are from the deaf community.
Yes, I think the majority of those are, yeah.
Which was a really interesting challenge for the audiobook, because we always try and cast with sort of the voices that match the characters. So that was actually a really unusual challenge for the audiobook, because in the book it's very clear that when the characters who use sign language are speaking, we have it in italics to signify that they are using BSL, but in the audio we don't have italics, so it was really new for me to think, how are we going to put this into audio? And then we got to meet our lovely actresses who are both varying forms of deaf, which is Claire English and Laura Stewart, and it was very new to me, and it was so much fun, and I got to meet two wonderful actresses that I'd never worked with before.
It was very interesting for me as well, because I'd had the same reservations about an audiobook when I got my contract, so I knew it was going to be published. I thought, how on earth, will we do that with so much conversation within the book taking place in BSL rather than in speech? But obviously we've worked around that. And when I got the email telling me that there were two deaf actresses who'd been cast for it, I was over the moon, because I had never thought that we'd be able to get the deaf representation in the audiobook. That wasn't a format where I thought it would really be achievable, but as it's worked out, it's fantastic. I came down to London to see Laura Stewart recording her section, so she does the flashback sections. And yeah, that was a really interesting day. Thank you for inviting me. I had a really good time. It was very exciting to be in the studio, but it was a really interesting experience as well, talking with Laura about how she felt about the book and how she felt about reading for an audiobook as well.
And both actresses really loved your book, and they were so excited to have the representation in the book, and really excited to have it in the audio. So we had two very different recording styles. So with Laura, when you came along, Laura is profoundly deaf, so we worked with a BSL interpreter who sat next to Laura in the booth and translated everything me and the producer were saying to Laura, and then she would read out loud. So we had a few quite fun conversations about pronunciations, because Laura has learned English through reading English, whereas we all learn English from hearing it.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's so interesting to see the different ways you can learn a language. And then with Claire is deaf for a little bit, so we basically recorded like with any other reader. Just had her have her headphones off so it didn't interfere with her hearing aid, and yeah, it was just as any other recording would be.
I think as well that's an interesting point, because that's what I'm hoping to reflect in the book as well, that there are so many different kinds of deaf people. Deaf people aren't one particular kind of person. The deaf community is it's a microcosm of the hearing community. You get people with all sorts of levels of deafness, people who were deaf from birth, people who became deaf later in life, people who use hearing aids or cochlear implants, people who don't use anything, people who speak, people who sign. And I think that was reflected in the audiobook, in the two very different, both very good actresses that read for the audiobook.
And I found both the book and the process of recording so informative. I didn't realise how stereotyped my views of people who were deaf were. I made the assumption that Laura wouldn't be able to have a conversation with me about BSL, but of course she could. She's able to lip read, she speaks English, and bar a few words, it was just like any other conversation. And I also learned a couple of signs during the day. I think my favourite was learning excited.
Yes, it's a good one.
That's a really, yeah, I love that sign, it just perfectly translates.
That's good, because a lot of the time when people meet you, if they don't know any sign language and they meet people who are sign language users, a lot of people, they just ask, oh, show me the swear words. So it's nice that you got something that was a little bit cleaner.
I already learned the swear words when I was little. But other than sign language terms I picked up during the day, I also learned to distinguish between deaf with a capital D and deaf with a little d, which prior to your book I didn't know there were varying capital D's and little d's in regards to being deaf.
Yes, it's to do with identity, really, and somebody who has a hearing loss and so might use the word deaf but doesn't consider themselves maybe part of a deaf community would probably just use a small d. But if somebody has grown up as part of the deaf community, or has later found their way to the deaf community later in life, and usually uses sign language for some of their communication, if not all, and feels that that is their culture, that's with a capital D. So I don't use the term hearing impaired personally. Some people prefer it if they have a hearing loss, but hearing impaired often suggests that there's something wrong with you that needs to be fixed, whereas deaf is just deaf. And so the deaf community is a community with a common language and a common culture and a common experience, and so that's what's denoted by the capital D.
And my mum says you can't earn anything from reading thrillers. Nell's book is absolutely brilliant, but just take it from me, you can get it in ebook, audio and paperback.